So everybody can hear me okay, can you? You can just raise your hands or write a little message if you can hear me. Let me know if there's any problems, or if everything's okay, then that's great, and we will carry on. And you can see the closed captioning as well, can you? Great, brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to now just share my screen with you and try and present. So bear with me while I attempt to do that. So the main thing really is just to let you know about your rights, your privacy and adjustments. And for us, this is all about next generation inclusive thinking. The first thing I need to do before we kick off, though, as I've been instructed to by my compliance, is just to say that it's quite an important notice I've been told I have to read out to you. So please note that all of our webinars are provided for general information purposes only, and their contents do not constitute any legal advice. Employability will make sure that our webinars are publicly available on condition that they or their contents will not in part or entirety be copied, reproduced, sent, emailed, distributed, shared, or further reproduced in any way without Employability first providing its written consent. The contents constitute original work and are protected by copyright and are the intellectual property of Employability. So now that we've got that legal bit out the way, we can move on to the good stuff. And I just want to really kick off by telling you, for those of you, some of you might be very familiar with who we are and what we do, and some of you may not be. So we support neurodiverse and disabled students and graduates. We want to make sure we can have a level playing field. We advise, we advocate on your behalf, and we want to make sure that you can get the careers that you deserve. And then on the other side, we work with organizations to guide them towards becoming more inclusive, more valued employers. And we do all of this really very unapologetically, unconfidently, and we have supported 13,000 people into employment. So for us, this is what being the next generation inclusive thinkers is all about. And everybody who comes on this journey with us, we hope is going to help us to achieve a more inclusive workplace. And I guess in the current COVID-19 situation, this is more pertinent than ever before. The need for support that you might have, that you're aware of your privacy, your choice, and other legal rights and protection under the Equality Act. And so, yeah, we want to make sure that we're here to support you, even though we're in a very unusual situation at the moment. I want to just do a quick poll. So maybe you can, I think we've got a poll that we've got set up there. Sarah, I don't know if you can access that for people to do the poll. And really we want to just find out how many of you that have joined us today are students and how many are university career staff, just so we've got a sense of who we're talking to today would be great. So I've launched the polling, so hopefully you can have a look at that. Okay, so we seem to have a bit of a mix. Seems like we've got a bit of a mix. We've got about 70% of students and about 25% at university or thereabouts, and about 10% or so in other. So thank you very much for letting us know that. That's really helpful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I want to now move on to just telling you a bit about who we are at Employability and how we support you. So let's So for those of you that aren't that familiar with us, we're a not-for-profit. We've been going since 2014, and what being a not-for-profit means that all of the money that we make from the services we provide to employers who we do charge for our services goes back into the business in order to enable us to provide a free service to you, disabled students and neurodiverse students. And all of the service we provide to university students and graduates is completely free. Some of the things you can do with us is you can apply through internships and graduate programs. You can get individualized advice and advocacy on adjustments, which we do a lot of work and support around. Anything really to do with disability related employment issues you can talk to us about and we'll advise and support you on. And then our skills enhancement and success maximization is really about what we can do to help upskill you, to make sure that you are primed for success, to make sure that you are empowered for success in every possible way, whether that's with tailored applications or CVs or interview tips, any of those sorts of things. And then in a normal world, not in the COVID world, we do provide on-campus empowerment as well through our one-to-one student advisory sessions, our training sessions for career staff, and we attend careers fairs, and we have EmployAbility campus ambassadors. Now, I'm very aware that obviously that's all a little bit different at the moment. So one of the reasons we're doing this webinar really is to ensure that we don't stop that support and that access to support. Of course, you can still contact us via the phone, email us in the usual way, but we wanted to make sure also that we are getting out there in front of you, actually speaking to you directly during this time as well. To access our services and our free support services, you have to register with us. So if you're not already registered with us, then please go ahead and do that. And once you've done that, that gives you free support and service, and you can apply to graduate programs through us or contact us in any ways that you wish to get that support. If you need things in a different format, please just let us know and we'll make sure we can get those to you. So now onto the main part really of what we're here to do, which is talk about your rights, privacy and adjustments. If any of you are existing candidates of ours, and I'm sure you may have heard us talk about some of this before, but the most important part of this really is for you to understand what your privacy and choice means and what that means in respect of adjustments, particularly when you're going through a recruitment process. So we call this not disclosure. For us, this isn't about disclosure. This isn't about any moral obligation or any ethical obligation on you to be honest, to be authentic, to be open. They're not words that we choose to use to talk about not disclosure. For us, this is about privacy and choice, and it's your privacy and choice. It's up to you what you want to share with somebody about your disability. And our focus rather is actually on adjustments and not on disclosure. So the sort of hangover of the word disclosure has been here since pre the Equality Act 2010. And before 2010, employers were allowed to ask you if you had a disability or not, maybe a little box you could tick and then you could say what your disability was. However, since 2010, there's been quite a big shift. And under Equality Act 2010, employers can no longer ask you anything about disability. They can't ask you if you have a disability, and they can't ask you any details of your disability during the recruitment process. So that's quite an important bit to remember. During the recruitment process, any questions around disability under Section 60 of the Equality Act are prohibited. The only exception to that is them asking you about any adjustments that you might need, and they should ask you that to ensure that they can provide the right adjustments for you to have a level playing field. We hear a lot of situations in which we feel there's pressure put on students or pressure put on disabled people to talk about their disability or to disclose their disability or to be open about their disability whilst going through a recruitment process. And often the argument that's used is, oh, but that's a good thing to do because you should tell the employer, you feel confident to do that, so that the employer can make the right adjustments. Actually, there's absolutely no need for you to feel any pressure to disclose anything that you're not comfortable to disclose. Should you wish to, of course, that's totally fine as well, and that's your choice. But we want to make sure that nobody feels pressurized to talk about something that is private to them that may or may not be relevant to tell an employer at a certain point. The only thing that is relevant to talk to with an employer about is the adjustments that you need, and you can share information on adjustments without talking about the nature of your disability or any details about your disability. The shift to disclosure comes post the offer. So once an employer makes you an offer of employment, they then can, under the Equality Act, ask you questions about your disability. And the reason for that is that there's a big shift of burden on them about what they need to do in order to be compliant with the Equality Act. So at that point, they can ask you. Of course, what you choose to do with that question is still entirely your choice. So the way we approach this is really to say, be informed about the recruitment process. You can really understand and think about when, why, and how you can ask for adjustments. So not when, why, and how can you think about disclosure, but rather when, why, and how you can ask for the adjustments that you need to enable you to perform as well as you can through the recruitment process. So when really depends on the job, and there are so many different types of roles out there, there's different sectors out there, there's different industries out there. When depends on the recruitment process of that particular role. So first thing I'd say to you that you really need to do is to understand and find out the details of the recruitment process so that you know what you can actually do and how you can actually ask the adjustments at the right point. The initial application stage, I've put here, remember your rights, and I don't know if anybody in the chat wants to share with us if they understand what that might mean. What does it mean about remember your rights during the application process? Does anyone want to write in chat what they think that might mean? Why would it be important for you to remember your rights during the initial application process? Don't know if anybody who's joined us has got any answers to that. So the reason, so you're not discriminated against, absolutely. Yeah, and people are writing in about schemes that might be available that can support you, and that comes to the why. Somebody's put reasonable adjustments, to have confidence to apply in the first place, so that you can look after your interests and protect yourself from discrimination. All of those things. What I would say is that, whoa, I'm going backwards, hold on, there we go. What I would say is one of the reasons why it might be really important to remember your rights in the initial application is if your profile looks different for reasons of disability. So for example, if you took longer to complete your degree, if you didn't get the grades you were expecting, if you didn't have access to the sort of work experience opportunities that you think your non-disabled peers may have had access to, anything that you think makes your application look different from that which you think your peers that you're competing with might have an advantage over you, and you might not have had the chance to actually demonstrate that because of your disability. So anything that you need to draw to the attention of the recruiter for them to understand that there's a reason that there's a difference, that your profile looks different, and it's not because you're not worthy, it's not because you haven't got the right skill set. There might be a very good reason why you didn't perform as well as you could have done in exams, for example. So the adjustment you're asking for there really is one of understanding from the recruiter. And so it is about your rights at that point. It's about the adjustment for them to be more, to not use your disability to exclude you from the process early on. And then with things like tests and assessment centres and interviews, again, remember your rights, your right to have the adjustments that you need to perform to the best of your ability. Now, sometimes these adjustments might be the same as the ones you've had at university, and sometimes in our experience, particularly for things like tests, they may be different. You might be able to get further additional time or other types of adjustments that you aren't aware of at university, or maybe that are appropriate for the tests for assessment centres or for psychometric online tests that many employers have, that you might not have needed at university. So I would encourage you to talk to us about these and to discuss these with us. These are processes that we are very, very familiar with and can talk to you about in great detail. You might find another point that might be relevant to talk about your adjustments might be at the job offer stage. So as we've said, your rights change, the employer's rights change, and therefore your objective changes at this point. Now you're thinking about adjustments for the workplace and no longer the recruitment process. And then once you're in the job, you might find that you didn't need adjustments. You might find that you asked for certain adjustments, but actually those need to be tweaked, those need to be adjusted. And again, you need to feel confident to ask for what you need, and you are protected under the Equality Act. So one thing I just want to actually say here before we move on is that the adjustments that you need in the recruitment process are simply adjustments for the recruitment process. They are not designed to inform the employer about any adjustments you might need in the workplace. And during the recruitment process, an employer cannot lawfully ask you for any adjustments that you might need for the workplace. So the only thing you need to focus on while you're going through a recruitment process is simply the adjustments for that stage of the recruitment process and not for workplace adjustments. Once you're offered a role, then we can discuss with you the workplace adjustments you might need, or you, if you're comfortable to do that, can talk to the employer about your own workplace adjustments at that point. So I want to move on to next to why. Why would you talk to an employer about your adjustments? Well, it might add impact to your application. You might want to talk about certain skills or competencies that you've learned, for example, like resilience or being a good team player, that maybe it's been directly impacted by you having the disability in your coping strategy. So maybe you can use that to demonstrate a particular competency, and that's okay to do. So it might add impact to your application. Obviously, if you need adjustments to level the playing field, that's a very good reason to make sure that you participate and ask for the right adjustments that you need. We talked about explaining differences in profile. That's another very good reason. Somebody mentioned earlier in the chat something about disability confidence schemes or particular schemes. So absolutely, yes, some employers are part of certain schemes. So disability confidence scheme is one of them, the government's disability confidence scheme. And under that scheme, if you declare that you have a disability, then you might have certain advantages. You might be able to miss certain parts of the process, for example. And that might be helpful to you. That might give you an advantage to participate in that process. And then, of course, if disability is a requirement for the job, so if you're applying to a certain charity or there's certain roles where actually they want you to have had experience of having a disability, then of course it would be relevant. So relevance, I suppose, is if disability is a requirement for the job, or if for some other reason it is relevant for you to let the employer know, then of course that would be a good reason to do so. So we now move on to why. Why would you want to, sorry, not why, but how would you share information about your disability, and how can you do that confidently? So what we'd say is, first of all, how you share information about the adjustments that you need certainly is positively, confidently, unapologetically. An employer is not doing you a favor by giving you adjustments. They're not doing it because they need to be nice to you. They're doing it because it's a legal requirement and because it's the right thing to do and because you deserve the correct adjustments for you to perform as well as you can. I know that there's a lot of people out there and a lot of students that we've spoken to who have a real sort of imposter syndrome, a real sort of worry about, and some people even at top universities we've spoken to who often say to us, oh, but if I've got dyslexia, then I'm probably not good enough to do this particular, I'm not good enough to be a lawyer, I'm not good enough to work for a big organization. And we have thousands of examples of people with different disabilities, with dyslexia and many other different disabilities, working as very successful lawyers, working at some of the top firms that we engage with, or working at any organization they want to be at. The part isn't about you questioning your own intellect or your own abilities or your own competencies. The point about this is to ask for the right adjustments so that you can get what you need to perform as well as you can. And for that, you absolutely should be positive, confident, and unapologetic in making sure that a level playing field is provided to you. That is your right. Provide concrete examples. Make sure that you know what sort of adjustments you need, and be specific, be instructive when you're telling an employer what your needs are. So, you know, don't just say, well, I need extra time. If you need extra time, tell them how much extra time you need. And by the way, at this point, a particular thing that's come to our attention that happens quite frequently is often for things like online psychometric testing. If you need extra time, you might write it into the employer and request that. In our experience, what sometimes happens is the employer will then say to you, send us your educational psychologist report. Now, there's two issues with this. Educational psychologist reports are designed by the very virtue of the name for education, adjustments for education. Quite apart from that, they also contain some very, very private, confidential, personal information about you. Under the Equality Act 2010, employers are not legally allowed to actually request that information from you and shouldn't be asking you for that. Further, they're at risk of breaking privacy laws under GDPR. So if an employer asks you for educational psychologist report or any sort of medical proof of disability, they are effectively breaking the law, and you're well within your rights to say, I won't be providing you with that because of my privacy and choice, but I will let you know what adjustments I need. And that's all you have to tell them, is the adjustments that you need. So make sure that the way you provide adjustments is instructive, that they will know what adjustments to actually make for you and at what point, and what's going to be the best way for you to access those adjustments. Don't make assumptions that an employer is going to know what sort of adjustments you need simply by you telling them your disability. They're not going to know. You know yourself what adjustments you might need, and if you're not sure because you haven't experienced the workplace or recruitment processes before, then talk to us about what those adjustments are. So research your employer really thoroughly, find out what type of organisation they are, find out what size of organisation they are, which sectors do they operate in, and are they disability inclusive? Have they been involved in any disability initiatives? And most importantly, I'd say all of those things, but also find out the details of the recruitment process that you're going to be asked to engage in. You need to understand what each part of that process is going to look like, what sort of exercises you're going to be engaging in, what's the nature of those exercises, so that you can be informed to know when you're going to need adjustments and also what type of adjustments you're going to need for that. So join us, I'd say join us in being the next generation inclusive thinkers. Be positive, be confident, make sure that you know what your rights are and that you feel comfortable to ask for the things that you need, and that you're confident in doing that. And as I said before, if you're unsure, then you need to speak to us so we can actually advise you in that journey and help you to make sure that you get what you need to perform as well as you can. And yeah, we wish you every luck on that journey. So yes, please do join us, and really want you guys to think of yourselves as the next generation inclusive thinkers in this space. And now we get to the bit of where you ask and we answer. So I'm going to see if there's any questions that are coming up. So Sarah, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Sarah, who is going to make herself visible. And if you can start asking any questions you've got in the chat, Sarah will be able to put those to me and I can then hopefully answer some of those for you.
Thanks very much, Tab. That was great. I hope everyone found that really useful. We have already had some questions coming in. So yeah, that's fantastic.
Fire away.
Yeah, okay, here's one here. How could you prove to an employer that you have a disability if you don't want to share your educational documents?
You don't need to prove to an employer that you have a disability. You just simply have to ask for the adjustments that you need, and an employer under the Equality Act can't legally ask you for any proof. Of course, once they offer you a role of employment, they can then ask you for the proof. So from an employer perspective, if they would be worried about, well, if I've given them somebody extra time or adjustments and maybe they don't have a disability, of course, once they offer you employment, they then can ask you for proof should they wish to. Most employers in our experience don't do that, and certainly the next generation inclusive thinking employers certainly don't do that. So the ones that we work with will take you on your word. If you ask for adjustments, it implies that you have a disability and therefore you need the adjustment. So I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you. And there's one here that's made a really good point. So when raising your rights or talking about what you need, could you potentially come across as problematic or a difficult candidate to manage?
I think that all depends on how you position it and what's the manner in which you do that. So I think this comes to the how, really, doesn't it? I think if you're positive, if you're confident, if you're unapologetic in how you're doing it, and you're asking, you're not being unreasonable in what you're asking for. And now I know that's a very tricky term in some ways, and the term reasonable adjustments is used all over the place. But for the purposes, I think as far as you guys are concerned out there, assume that any adjustment that you need, that you're going to ask for, is reasonable. And in fact, the law is there to protect you, to make sure that your reasonable rights are protected, and that's a really wide scope. So don't worry about your adjustment not being reasonable under the law. But it's not about being a troublemaker. It's about ensuring that you get what you need to do the best that you can. And as long as you're polite and you're professional in your approach, and you ask for things in a timely manner, so you're not turning up on the day of the assessment centre and demanding certain adjustments you've made right there and then, and you haven't told them beforehand, that wouldn't be reasonable. But if you ask them before the event and they've got time to make those adjustments for you, and you ask it in polite language, then I don't think you're going to be seen as a troublemaker. I think you're going to be seen as somebody who is in control and who knows their rights and who is asking for what they deserve to get.
Great. And somebody's asked here, how should we go about finding out the details of the recruitment process if it's not clear in the job ad itself?
So I think you can often contact the organisation, you can often contact HR or the recruiters to find out a bit more detail about that. At that point, if you wanted to, you could just let them know that you might need some adjustments, and for you to determine what adjustments you might need, that you need to have a bit more information on what you'll be asked to participate in, what exercises you might be asked to participate in. You can be clear that you're not asking for them to share the details of those exercises, but just the nature of the sorts of exercises, so that you can understand and inform them about the adjustments you might need. Now, if you find that difficult to do, and if you think that's going to be a tricky thing to do, or you're not getting the information that you need, again, we're happy to do that for you and on your behalf. Recruiters often do share information with us, maybe sometimes in more detail, about the nature of certain exercises, so that we then can understand what those are and work with you to work out the best adjustments for you to participate in those.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sometimes frustrating for us, isn't it, when employers try to hold back on the information about assessment centres, because it's obviously we need to know that information to be able to help you and advise on the adjustments. So yeah, we're definitely able to help with that.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then I've got a question here. Are we still running internships, scholarships, etc.?
We are. We know already from some of the internships that are supposed to be taking place this summer, that we've had quite a lot of success with some of our candidates on, that those are taking place. Information that we have so far from those employers that we work with is that these will be remote. And I know that those employers have really been very, very good at keeping the candidates who've got onto those internships fully informed of how it's going to work, and are in the process of continuously doing that. So internships, certainly for the employers that we work with, are happening this summer. There was one employer we were working with, a smaller employer, who unfortunately was unable to offer that internship for this summer. Most of the larger employers we're working with are still carrying on doing that. In terms of internships and us opening up opportunities for autumn 2020, in terms of insight days and other opportunities, and internships for summer 2021, we expect to, in the normal manner, to be opening those from June onwards. So please do look at our website for that. We're not expecting any changes in that, not least because summer 2021 is a year away. And so I think employers are expecting to open those internships in the normal way with us. And similarly for insight days that we're hoping to run in autumn as well. So please do, make sure you keep an eye on our website. We send some of you, if you're registered with us, we'll send you newsletters and so on to update you on those as well. But do keep checking our website for any opportunities that you can apply for in the normal way from June onwards.
Okay, great, thank you. And somebody's asked here if it's possible to ask employers for extra time to submit applications. So I guess more time past the deadline.
I think you'd really have to think about what the reason and nature, why you're asking for that. So usually applications open with plenty of time for people to submit their applications. I mean, months, usually weeks and months quite often. And our advice always is to get your applications in early, because even though an employer might set their deadline for, let's say, I don't know, some point in end of November, let's say, you might find that most of the roles that they have available are filled well before that date, even though they've still got the application for that particular process open. So employers tend to process applications as they get them on a rolling basis. And the closer you get to the time of deadline, the far fewer positions are actually available for that particular internship or graduate program, whatever it might be. So our recommendation would always be apply sooner rather than later. Now, if for whatever reason you have a really genuine reason, maybe you are unwell, whatever it might be, that you were unable to fill out that application form, you can, of course, ask, but it will be very dependent upon whether there are any roles left or whatever it is that you're applying for, if there's still an opportunity to participate in that, or whether those roles are now filled. So where possible, and I know it's not always possible, but where possible, I'd say apply early. There is a little proviso here, though, because for most internship roles, if you're applying directly to an employer, most employers will want you to be in your penultimate year of university. And there's a difference if you're applying for internships through us to those employers, though, because one of the things that we have asked the employers who work with us to do is, as an adjustment, to make sure that those opportunities are available not only to penultimate year students, but also finalists or people who have very recently graduated. So for most of the employers that we work with, that is an adjustment they will make for applications through us. And we can talk to you about that in more detail if you've got any questions about that vis-a-vis your specific application.
Thank you. And Tab, this person has asked, do you think it's best to not talk about disability until we are hired? And if we are more open about it, could it change our prospect of getting the job?
So again, I'm going to remind people of talking about disability, which is absolutely your choice to do, should you wish to do that and you're comfortable to do that, versus talking about adjustments. And there is a really big difference. Whether or not you want to talk about your disability or not, and whatever you're comfortable with, is entirely up to you. And it's a different choice for everybody. Everybody feels differently about what they're comfortable with. Personal choice there. When it comes to talking about adjustments, of course, it's still your personal choice if you choose not to ask for the adjustments that you need. However, if you don't ask for the adjustments that you need, so you don't need to mention your disability, but you may need to say, I have a disability, therefore I need these adjustments. You don't need to say any more detail about your disability at all. But if you don't ask for the right adjustments, if you don't ask for adjustments full stop, the chances are that you're really yourself putting barriers in front of you that may stop you actually getting the role. Some roles are highly competitive. Without the right adjustments, you really reduce your chances. So what I would say to you there is that ask for the adjustments that you need to maximize your chances of success of getting through a process. I don't know if that answers the question, Sarah. Was there another part to that question, or was that most of it?
That was most of it, yes. And I guess sort of leading on from that, someone's asked, what type of adjustments can we ask for in interviews and assessment centres? Obviously very individual, but...
Very individual, and I mean, exhaustively, really. What sort of adjustments? Okay, let me give you some examples. Some people need extra time, and sometimes this, and often actually, it's more than 25% extra time on your educational psychologist report for long essay-based questions at university, because it's a different sort of test quite often you asked to participate in for an employer. So it might be extra time, it might be having things in a different format. So it might be, for example, rather than doing a video interview, which many employers now have, maybe preferring to do a phone interview or an in-person interview. So it could be asking for access to that part of the process in a different way, which is possible. It may be if you're going into an assessment centre and you're required to do a presentation, it may be that you need extra time for that presentation, or it may be that that particular part of the process is something that you simply cannot participate in. And if that's the case, then it might be asking for an exemption, which is more unusual. It's rarer to do for certain parts of the process, but we do sometimes do that. We have sometimes done that. We've worked with, for example, some visually impaired candidates who simply cannot participate in logical reasoning tests because there are shapes and patterns that just don't work with certain types of visual impairment. So it's always unique to the individual. And whenever we have a discussion with you about what adjustments you need, we're able to make suggestions to you that fit for the adjustments that you need for the particular difficulties you might have in going through the process. So I'd say adjustments should always be specific to the person concerned and for that particular part of the process.
Okay, that sounds good. There's quite a few questions here, so I'm just going to try and get through as many as I can.
Sure. And just while Sarah's having a look at those, I also just wanted to say that if we don't get around to answering your questions in the time frame we have for the webinar today, then please do forward those on to us, email them to us, contact us with them, and we will for sure answer them. Also, just to draw your attention to our next webinar session, which is basically about your questions answered on anything to do with disability. So if we don't answer yours today, please do join us for that session and we can answer them then, or you can email your questions to us as well. But anyway, Sarah, any other questions?
Yeah, just before I go on to the next question, someone shared a really positive experience that they had when they asked for the interview questions beforehand. Once they were invited to the interview, and the employer provided those and were really helpful about it. So that's just a positive point to share with you all there. And somebody has said here that they were given a video interview by an employer without any opportunity to ask for adjustments, and then had to answer the questions in a very short amount of time, actually in another language. So this person was asking about the rules applying internationally. How does that work? If you might know the answer to that.
So I think I need to know more information. So was this in Europe, for example? I don't know if we know that already, Sarah, if this was...
well, actually, there was another one about Europe as well. So yeah, perhaps if we covered Europe, just a little bit of advice on that would be great.
So the way that we work, and with all the employers we work with, although we work with some very large corporates who of course operate in different jurisdictions, we always tell them to ensure that whatever they're doing across different jurisdictions, that they have the same rules, that they apply the same best practice. And for us, as far as employers are concerned, what we say to employers is best practice goes hand in hand with compliance. And so it's really important, of course, that you fulfill the requirements of the particular jurisdiction you're in, but equally that you have, if you're one organisation, you don't have different rules in different countries and different places. So what I'd say, and I forgot, sorry, the question was, right, so there was two parts to that question. The first part of it was that the person was asked to participate in a video interview without being asked about any adjustments.
Yeah.
So what I'd say to that is that sometimes that can happen, and not every employer not every employer does, although they should ask you if you need any adjustments for parts of the process. So we encourage every employer, every touch point, to ask that question. But if they don't, I'd say you need to find out before, and this is where we go back to saying be informed. You need to find out what the process is actually going to be. What parts of the process are you going to be required to participate in? So that before you get to that part of the process, before you have to participate in that part of the process, you can so even if the employer hasn't asked you specifically, you can email the employer and tell them what adjustment you might need. So if that wasn't going to be suited to you as a way of demonstrating your skills, or if you needed extra time in the video interview, then my recommendation would be email the employer, say to them, I have a disability and I will need extra time for the questions, or can you give me some more information on how this all works so I can let you know what adjustments I need? So I'd say be really informed about the process, because sometimes employers don't ask you and don't give you that opportunity, but be proactive, reach out to them and make sure that you get the adjustments that you need. In terms of different jurisdictions, as I said before, I think our advice to employers would always be to ensure that they're being equitable and fair and allowing full access to any parts of their process, irrespective of the country that they're operating in. And certainly if they're international employers, I'd say that they really need to make sure that they're doing that and being compliant across all jurisdictions. And for most European law, as far as we know, it's pretty similar to what the requirements of the Equality Act are, and adjustments do need to be made.
Great. And someone was asking, you know, what is deemed to be reasonable, and would employers deem something to be unreasonable? How does that side of it work?
So for large corporates, which is most of the employers we work with, and maybe some of the employers that you might be applying to, although you might apply to small employers as well, the word reasonable is a very legalistic term. It started to become used in common speak. So, you know, I often hear all over the place it's used, do you have any reasonable adjustments? And actually what we're saying to employers, we'll just ask if you have any adjustments, because the term reasonable is a bit confusing. It's a legalistic term, it has a particular meaning in law. But in fact, I think that in the Equality Act, it's been put there, in fact, to protect you, the potential employees, rather than the employer. Most things, if they were to get to a court of law for corporates, certainly large corporates, would be deemed to be reasonable. So I think what I'd like you to do, and my request to you would be, don't focus on the word reasonable. Assume that the adjustment that you need is going to be reasonable. And if we ever get to the point of where we're having a discussion with you and saying, well, actually, that's not reasonable, let's address that then. But I haven't yet come across a situation, apart from maybe once, in fact, in my whole time of working in this, so the whole 14.5 years I've been running EmployAbility, and for the 5 or 6 years before that when I was working in this space, I've only once come across a situation where a candidate was given an adjustment in the process, and then they actually started with an employer, and neither we could have known, nor the candidate could have known, or the employer could have known that in fact the adjustment for them to be able to actually do the work they were required to do was impossible to make, because the software this candidate required and needed to use for the adjustment simply wasn't compatible with the global software of that particular organization. But that was a really unusual situation, and that's one example in sort of 15 plus years of working in this space. So I really, from your perspective, wouldn't worry about whether or not the adjustment you need is reasonable. I would make the assumption that the adjustment you need is reasonable, actually. And if we get to a point of where we think about that, then we'll talk to you about that. But assume your adjustments are reasonable always.
Great. And we've got a few similar sort of questions coming in about how people can find out what adjustments they need. They might not be too sure what they need. So yeah, just asking about how they can find out more on what adjustments they need if they're not familiar with that.
So if you're not familiar with the adjustments you need, if you're not sure what the adjustments you need might be, and I appreciate you might be really comfortable with your adjustments at university, but maybe you've just never been through a recruitment process or been in the workplace, and then you simply don't know what you can get, how to get it, what that might be. And often the adjustments you need through a recruitment process in the workplace are different from university-based adjustments. Ask us, talk to us, talk to Sarah, our adjustments queen. She knows everything there is to know about adjustments. I can guarantee you she's been doing this for many years. So, but yeah, talk to Sarah, talk to anybody else on our team. We'll be able to advise you about what adjustments. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And somebody's asked here if a candidate tells EmployAbility what their disability is, which obviously we would expect them to do so to register with us, would we then go on and tell a company that they're applying to about their disability?
No, because we practice what we preach. And what that means is we ask you to tell us, but we're not the employer. So we can ask you, we're a support organisation. And the reason we ask you is that we have as much information as possible to enable us to work with you and to support you in the process with whatever disability you have, and to give you proper advice on that. We don't share any information about your disability with the employer unless there's a need to, and if there's a need to, then only with your express permission. So we only share information with the employer on a need to know basis. When you apply through us, the part of your application that doesn't go to the employer is any of the bit about your disability or anything along those lines. They just get the bulk of the application that's about the competency questions and things like that, things that they've asked on their application form, that they would ask on their application form. And none of the other information is shared. We do, of course, having had discussions with you, share information with them on what adjustments you might need to go through part of the process so that you can succeed in that part of the process. And we have the discussion with you first for each step of the process to make sure that it's the right adjustment. But we don't share information on your disability at all, unless there's a need to know. And if we think there's a need to know, then we'll discuss that with you first, always.
Great. I'm conscious that we're running over. Shall we take 2 more questions? Tab, do you think?
Sure, let's do 2 more questions. I don't want to keep anybody longer than we said we would, so let's take 2 more questions. And then, of course, we can, people can join us for the next one, or they can contact us and email it through any questions they've got. Sure.
Yeah, please do email the questions. I am conscious there's a few here that we haven't been able to reply to.
Sure.
There's one here about explaining gaps on your CV due to a long-term illness. How might you be able to go about doing that, effectively without giving too much detail about your disability?
So you don't have to give any details of your disability. You can simply say, because of my disability, I was unable to, whatever it might be, participate. And if it was at university, I was unable to participate in my second year. As an example, as my second year at university, as I was in hospital, that might be that reason, or whatever the reason might be, I was unable to participate due to my disability. However, now I am back at university. So, you can just kind of follow up with, give the factual bits of the information that are relevant and required. You don't have to give any personal information there. You simply have to state that it was because of that, because of a disability, and then the situation that you're now in. And that's all you have to do, really. I mean, obviously there might be some very particular circumstances going on here that I'm conscious of. So I don't know who's asked that question, but if you reach out to us following on from these sessions, if you email us, we can have a more direct and personalised answer to your particular situation.
And another one here that I can just very quickly answer, actually. It says, if EmployAbility has partnered with the company, but the internship graduate role is not on our website, should we speak to EmployAbility before applying directly to the company? Yes, please do. Please let us know about that. That would be really helpful. And someone has asked about access to work and just, a little bit more about that process and being concerned that employers don't know very much about it.
Employers sometimes don't know about it. I know that a lot of the large employers actually don't often use it because they just pay for the adjustments themselves. But we do know about it. And certainly if it's relevant, I know that there's many times that Sarah has supported an employer and you as a candidate with any kind of access to work arrangements. So it is something that we know about, and some employers certainly don't. But, we can educate them. You can educate them about it, because actually it's a business benefit for them. If access to work is actually going to pay for any of the adjustments, and that's a cost they don't have to pay for. Now, as I said, many large employers tend to not get involved with access to work and do pay for their own adjustments. But I know that if you're a smaller organisation, if you're a medium-sized organisation, I know that for us as an organisation, when we've had employees who need particular support, we have used access to work because we're a small organisation and it definitely was required for us. So there are certain situations in which, yes, of course, access to work can be used, and the more we can educate employers to know that that's there, then hopefully more use can be made of it. But we can certainly support with that if anybody needs support with that as well.
Great.
Should we take an end to the questions, Sarah?
Say again, sorry?
Shall we end the questions there, as I'm conscious of time?
Yeah, that would be good.
Great, brilliant. Well, I wanted just to say thank you to everyone for taking part. Please join us on the 6th of May for our next instalment in the Next Generation Inclusive Thinkers webinar series, and that's next Wednesday at 2 o'clock. So it's an open Q&A, your disability and employment questions answered. If you've got any that you want to send to us ahead of that session, then please do that as well, and we can answer them in the session, or you can simply ask them in the session itself. This particular session was very much about your privacy, your rights and adjustments. The session next time round is much more open, so we can take any questions to disability and employment. And then we have a whole series of other webinars on the Wednesday after that and the Wednesday after that. So please look out for those as well. And email us with any other questions you've got, or any other things you want to talk to us about, and we're here to help. So I know that one of my colleagues was going to share the survey with you, the sort of quick questionnaire with you at the end. So I don't know if that can be shared, the type form questionnaire. I don't know if that's being shared in the chat right now. Sarah, can you see if that's being shared in the chat right now? The link to the type form questionnaire.
I can't. Oh, yeah, there we go. The link's there.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So guys, if you've participated, we'd love it. It's anonymous. So we'd love it if you can actually, as far as I know, it's anonymous anyway. We'd love it if you can just give us some feedback. It will just really help us for the next sessions and to improve on those. But for now, I just want to say thank you so much for taking part. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.